the very first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet.
The morning sun rose steadily over the wide valleys of Utah, burning away the cool mist that had lain upon the rugged hills. It struck first upon the high ridges of red sandstone, then crept down to the scattered cabins of the settlement. Already the air was thick with the sounds of industry, the lowing of cattle, the creak of wagons, the shouts of men in the fields. Yet within John Ferriar's house there hung a weighty stillness, the kind that comes when the air is laden with unspoken thoughts. Ferriar, that sturdy frontiersman who had once been known for his independence of spirit, now sat at his wooden table with a brow darkened by worry. His daughter, Lucy, pale and lovely, moved quietly about the room, trying to hide the tremor in her hands as she set out the morning meal. She knew her father's silence too well. It was the silence that came before harsh words or grim decisions. It was only some weeks since the leaders of the great Mormon community, those whom they called elders and prophets, had visited Ferriar with a command that had struck like thunder into his home. Lucy, they said, must marry. She must choose, or rather allow them to choose for her, one of two suitors: Joseph Stangerson, a man of harsh aspect and rigid faith, or Enoch Drebber, coarse, ill-favored, yet powerful within the sect. Both men had pressed their claims, and both had declared that the prophet himself approved the union. Ferriar had listened in grim silence that day, his jaw set like iron, though his heart burned with indignation. Now, as Lucy tried in vain to coax him to eat, his lips pressed tight beneath his grizzled moustache, he struck his hand suddenly upon the table. "By heaven, Lucy," he muttered, "they may drive their laws into the lives of others, but not into ours. You are mine, mine by right of years of toil, mine by right of the love of a father who saved you from death in the desert. They shall not force you, girl, while I have a hand to strike or a voice to speak." Lucy came to him and laid a trembling hand upon his arm. Her voice was soft, but there was a firmness beneath her gentleness. "Father, you know as well as I do that their word is law here. We are alone among them. What hope have we to withstand their will? Yet my heart is not theirs to command. I could never wed Stangerson or Drebber. You know it, Father." Ferriar rose and paced heavily about the room, his boots thudding on the bare boards. He growled, "Hope? There is always hope while we breathe. I would sooner see you laid in yonder churchyard than in the arms of either of those black-hearted villains. If they think to frighten John Ferriar into submission, they reckon without their man." At that moment there came a heavy knock upon the door. Lucy started, her face paling. Her father's hand went at once to the rifle that stood in the corner. But the knock was repeated, and a stern voice called from without, "John Ferriar, the prophet would speak with you. Open that you may hear his word." Ferriar set his teeth, then laid down the rifle with a muttered oath. He motioned Lucy aside and flung open the door. Upon the threshold stood 3 men, grave and imposing. 2 were elders whom Ferriar knew well by sight. The third was unmistakable, the tall, commanding figure of Brigham Young himself, his broad forehead shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his keen eyes gleaming with authority. For a moment there was silence as the prophet's gaze swept the simple room, lingering on Lucy with a look in which sternness and admiration were strangely blended. Then he entered without waiting to be invited, the elders following close behind. "Brother Ferriar," said Young in a voice deep and deliberate. "The saints have shown you much favor. When you lay dying in the desert, it was we who took you in, who gave you home, land, and fellowship. You have prospered among us. You have grown rich. Surely you will not turn ungrateful now that we ask of you what every man in our faith has cheerfully yielded, obedience to the word of the prophet." Ferrier's rugged face darkened, but he held his tongue. Brigham Young continued, his tone rising like a preacher addressing a multitude. "It has been decreed that your daughter shall wed. It is the law of our people, the will of heaven, that every maiden shall be given in marriage. 2 of our brethren, Joseph Stangerson and Enoch Drebber, have both sought her hand. It is for her to choose between them. Refuse, and you set yourself not against man, but against the Almighty himself." Lucy shrank back, her eyes filling with tears. Ferrier stepped forward, his voice hoarse with suppressed passion. "My daughter is mine to guard, prophet or no prophet. I will not see her handed over like some prize beast to men she loathes. She shall not wed either Stangerson or Drebber so long as I live." The room grew tense, as though the very air thickened with the weight of his defiance. The 2 elders exchanged a glance, but Brigham Young did not move a muscle. His gaze remained fixed on Ferrier, cold and unwavering. "Beware, John Ferrier," he said slowly, each word falling like a stone. "Beware how you set your will against the will of the Lord. Already you have tarried too long. Choose quickly, or the hand of judgment shall be upon you." Without waiting for reply, he turned and strode from the room, his followers at his side. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud, leaving father and daughter alone in the silence that followed. Ferrier dropped heavily into his chair, his great hands trembling. Lucy knelt beside him, her face white with fear. "Oh, father," she whispered, "what shall we do?" He looked down at her with eyes in which love and despair were mingled. "What shall we do, child? We shall fight, that is what. But we must move with cunning as well as strength. They have power, but we have the right, and perhaps—" He paused, lowering his voice as though the walls themselves might be listening. "Perhaps we have friends yet even here who would not see us perish at their hands." And with that dark promise hanging in the air, the first day of trial began for John Ferrier and his beloved Lucy.
The sound of the prophet's departing footsteps seemed to echo long after the door had closed. For a while neither Ferrier nor Lucy spoke. Outside, the life of the settlement carried on. Men calling to one another in the fields, the creak of wagon wheels over gravel, the braying of a mule somewhere beyond. Yet inside, it felt as though a shadow had passed over their house, chilling even the morning sun. Ferrier sat with his head bowed, his thick fingers drumming restlessly on the wooden arm of his chair. Lucy, still kneeling at his side, clutched his hand as if seeking strength from its rough grasp. At last he lifted his face, and there was a set look in his eyes, the look of a man resolved upon some desperate course. "Lucy," he said, speaking slowly, as though weighing every word, "we are marked now. Brigham Young never threatens idly. If we resist, they will strike. And yet, resist we must. Better death than dishonor." Her lips trembled. "Father, do you mean we must flee?" He nodded grimly. "Aye, flee we must, and soon. But fight from this valley is no simple matter. These hills are guarded, every road is watched. Still, there may be a chance if we act with secrecy, and if God sends us a friend." As if summoned by his words, there came a gentle tap at the window. Ferrier started, his hand going to the rifle once more, but when he turned, he saw the face of a young man pressed against the glass. A moment later, the door opened softly, and Jefferson Hope stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and clear, earnest eyes, Hope carried with him the air of one who had lived much in the open, who had faced danger and hardship, and had grown the stronger for it. His gaze went at once to Lucy, and in it Ferrier read the unspoken truth that had long been plain. This was the man her heart had chosen. Hope crossed swiftly to her and took her hand. "Lucy," he said, his voice low but steady, "I heard the prophet had been here. I could not rest until I knew what had passed." Ferrier answered for her. What passed was a command that she wed Stangerson or Drebber, a command backed by threats. You know me well enough, Hope, to guess my answer. His eyes flashed. I'd have guessed no other. But this means danger, grave danger. Their spies are everywhere. Already the elders will be plotting. We must act, and act at once. Lucy clung to his hand, her fear giving way to hope at his presence. "Jefferson," she whispered, "is there truly a way?" "There is always a way," he said firmly. "I've crossed these mountains before. I know their passes. With swift horses and courage, we can outdistance pursuit. But we must not linger. Tonight, if you will trust me, we can be on our way." Ferrier's brow furrowed. "Tonight." He looked to Lucy, then back to Hope. "You speak bold, lad, but not without sense. Still the risk of staying is death. They will not wait long. Do you think Drebber or Stangerson will let their prize slip from their hands? Already they will have spoken to the Danites, those so-called Avenging Angels, who do the will of the church with knife and bullet. If you remain here another day, your lives will not be worth an hour's purchase." Ferrier was silent, but his great hands clenched and his teeth ground together in impotent rage. At last he struck the table with his fist. "Then be it so. Tonight we ride. I would sooner face wolves in the wilderness than saints in this valley. Lucy, child, gather what little you can carry. Jefferson, you and I will see to the horses." Lucy sprang up, her cheeks flushed with sudden hope, while Jefferson clasped Ferrier's rough hand in a grip that sealed their resolution. For the first time that morning, the gloom seemed to lift. Yet even as they planned, a strange unease lingered in the room. Outside, the settlement lay quiet in the afternoon sun, its wooden cabins drowsing in the heat, its people going about their tasks with measured calm. But to Ferrier and his companions, it was no longer a haven. It was a cage, and every glance, every shadow, seemed to conceal an enemy. As Jefferson Hope took his leave to make preparations, he paused at the door, his eyes fixed on Lucy with a look that promised both devotion and defiance. "Courage, Lucy," he said. "By tomorrow's dawn we shall be beyond their reach, and once free, I swear no prophet nor elder shall ever come between us again." With that he was gone, leaving Ferrier and his daughter to their thoughts. The long shadows of evening began to creep across the floor, and with them came the heavy knowledge that their fates now hung by a thread that might, at any moment, be cut by unseen hands.
The night after Jefferson Hope's daring plan was laid seemed longer than any Ferrier or Lucy had ever lived through. The cabin, once a place of warmth and safety, had become a prison, its wooden walls echoing with every creak as though whispering betrayal. The faintest shuffle of feet on the gravel outside set their hearts pounding, and every murmur of voices drifting from the street filled them with dread. John Ferrier, for all his strength, sat restless in his chair, his rifle across his knees, listening with strained ears to the quiet of the settlement. Lucy knelt by the small chest where she kept her belongings, folding away a few simple garments. It was not much, but she handled each piece with trembling fingers, for in leaving them, she was leaving behind all memory of the only home she had ever known. Jefferson Hope had promised to return once the moon was up. Each hour that passed dragged upon their spirits, yet with it came also a growing flame of resolution. Ferrier had chosen they would rather risk the wild frontier than yield to the prophet's decree. At last, near midnight, came the sound they awaited, the soft pad of hooves in the dust outside, followed by the faint scrape of a hand at the shutter. Ferrier rose at once, shouldered his rifle, and cautiously opened the door. Hope slipped in like a shadow, his eyes glinting in the pale moonlight. "All is ready," he said in a low voice. 3 horses, fresh and strong, tethered in a hollow by the cottonwoods. The pass is clear for now, but we must ride before dawn. Lucy sprang to his side, her fear forgotten in the sight of him. Ferrier clasped the young man's arm with a grip of iron. "You're a brave lad, Jefferson," he muttered. "May heaven reward you for this. Let us go before it's too late." They moved swiftly, Lucy with her bundle pressed close to her breast, the men carrying what little food and water they could manage. Outside, the night air was cold and still, the stars bright against the black bowl of the sky. The settlement lay silent behind them, every roof outlined in silver by the moon. Yet that silence was itself a menace, for it seemed the hush of something watchful, something waiting. In the hollow by the cottonwoods, the horses stood ready, their breath steaming. Hope helped Lucy to the saddle, his hand lingering for a moment on hers, and then mounted his own beast with practiced ease. Ferrier swung himself up with surprising agility for a man of his years. "Forward," he whispered. "We ride for freedom." They set off at a brisk pace, the muffled thud of hooves blending with the night's quiet. The trail wound between ridges of rock, climbing gradually towards the high pass that led out of the valley. Lucy, though unused to the saddle, bore herself with courage, her heart lifted by the thought of deliverance. Ferrier rode grim and silent, his eyes ever scanning the darkness for sign of pursuit. Hope led the way, guiding them with the certainty of one who knew each landmark, each shadowed turn. For an hour they pressed on, the settlement dropping farther behind, until at last they drew rein in a sheltered gorge. Here Hope dismounted, examined the tracks behind them, and listened intently to the night. All was still. "We have gained a start," he said. "If we keep to this pace till dawn, we may win clear." But even as the words left his lips, Lucy gave a sudden cry and pointed back down the trail. A faint glimmer of light moved there, then another and another, like fireflies in the dark. Hope's jaw tightened. He said, "They are on our track. The Danites, the Avenging Angels." Ferrier's face grew ashen, but his hand steadied on the rifle. "Ride on," he commanded. "We must not falter. Ride on, Jefferson." Spurred by fear, the horses leapt forward, clattering over the stony path. Behind them, the lights quickened, and faintly across the stillness came the echo of voices shouting. All through the night, the chase continued, across ravines and ridges, past jutting crags and treacherous slopes. Sometimes the enemy's lights grew nearer, sometimes they dwindled, but never did they vanish. The pursuers were relentless, like wolves scenting prey. At length, as dawn broke in pale streaks over the mountains, they reached a narrow defile where sheer cliffs pressed close on either side. Here the trail forked, one path leading upward into the high country, the other winding down towards the desert. Hope drew rein, his horse flecked with foam. "We must choose," he said. "The desert track may baffle them, but it is long and waterless. The mountain path is steep, but shorter. Which shall it be?" Before Ferrier could answer, a rifle crack split the morning air. A bullet whined past and buried itself in the rock beside them. Another shot followed, splintering stone at Ferrier's stirrup. Lucy screamed, clinging to her saddle. "They have us in range," Hope cried. "Quick, upward, follow me." They dashed into the mountain track, the horses scrambling desperately over the rough ground.
The enemy shouts rang louder now, the shots more frequent. Hope fired back once or twice with his revolver, but the pursuers pressed on, undaunted. It was then, at the steepest part of the ascent, that disaster struck. Ferrier's horse, weary and overburdened, stumbled and fell, pitching its rider heavily to the ground. Ferrier rose to his knees, clutching his side. "Go on," he gasped, waving them forward. "Save her, save Lucy." Hope leapt down, trying to lift him, but the old man's face told the truth. He was mortally struck, whether by bullet or by the cruel fall. "Leave me," Ferrier cried with all the strength left in him. "Swear to guard her. Swear it, Jefferson." Hope's throat tightened. He bent swiftly, pressed Ferrier's rough hand, and whispered, "I swear it." Then, dragging the sobbing Lucy back to her horse, he forced her onward, even as the Avenging Angels closed in behind. The last sight Lucy had of her father was him standing, rifle in hand, defiant even in his last moments, a lone figure facing the oncoming horde. Then the path curved, and she was lost to her forever. Hope spurred their horses on, but though he fought like a man possessed, it was no use. The pursuers swarmed upon them. Rough hands tore Lucy from the saddle, dragging her shrieking into their grasp. Hope fought desperately, striking and firing till his revolver clicked empty, but sheer numbers overwhelmed him. A blow to the head brought him crashing senseless to the ground. When he came to, the sun was high, the valley below filled with the triumphant cries of the Mormons. Lucy was gone, borne back to the settlement, her fate sealed. And John Ferrier lay somewhere among the cliffs, silent forever. Hope, battered and broken, was left to crawl away into the wilderness, vowing with every tortured breath that he would never rest until justice was done.